Okay, well, welcome in. Thanks so much for joining us for this session today. My name is Tricia Stiggy. I am the founder of Transformation Strategies, and we are a transformational change coaching and consulting firm based in the Philadelphia area. And we really have a specialty in expertise in helping people through transition in their lives, whether it's personal changes they're going through or as an organization, as a culture, trying to move themselves to whatever future they desire to have. And one of the reasons that I wanted to run this session, Cultivating Emotionally Intelligent uh, Workplaces, is because we have a lot of things that we work on as organizations and as people, and our workplaces today are really demanding workplaces that are having healthy levels of psychological safety, of trust, of good mental health. And any business that's really wanting to be competitive in today's marketplace has really got to have emotional intelligence, higher levels of emotional intelligence in their workplaces. And you really cannot be fully emotionally intelligent until you've really looked and created and developed this one entity, one pillar around self awareness. So we can't really be self aware unless we're really kind of exploring and addressing some of the things that impact our ability to be self aware. And we have a lot of topics that are often undiscussable in our lives. You'll see in our series, we've talked about imposter syndrome, we've talked about performing ourselves to the point of, exhaustion. And a lot of these are driven from places, things that may have happened to us in our uh, previous life experiences or whatever, but often aren't really discussed in the workplace. So I wanted to provide a forum for us to talk about these things because they really do impact our own emotional intelligence. Today, we're going to be talking about this concept about people pleasing. And to set the context a bit, people pleasing is really about a person who puts others' needs ahead of their own, sometimes to the point of their own detriment. In and of itself, people pleasing can be seen as being unselfish, but yet it really, in the long term, can have a pattern of really abuse and self sacrifices and can really lead to harmful things for ourselves. So before we dive into some of the aspects of this conversation, I wanted to welcome in my panelists today, Melanie and Scott, who are both wonderful guests. I'm thrilled to have them on the show today. And I'm going to ask them to just briefly introduce themselves and share a little bit about why this topic is important to you. So, Scott, I'll start with you. Just briefly introduce us, tell us who you are and why you're interested in this subject matter.
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Trish. Here. My name's Scott Giacomucci. I'm the director and owner of the Phoenix Center for Experiential Trauma Therapy in Media, Pennsylvania. And I have lots of other roles. I teach at a couple of graduate social work programs, and I've written a couple of books and have a line of research on trauma. So this topic was important to me. I mean, the whole series about emotional intelligence in the workplace is particularly important. A lot of my work in the past year has been about helping organizations and figuring out how to make my own organization more trauma informed, which by default means more emotionally intelligent. The people pleasing topic, I think it's something that my clients, psychotherapy clients, are constantly struggling with. And I'm constantly working with individuals or groups on like how to work through these tendencies and connect it back to, in many cases, past adversity and trauma. And it's something as a business owner that I'm constantly working through myself as well. So I feel like I've been kind of trying to work this out on multiple levels. So I'm excited to be here and dive into the topic.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. Melanie, how about yourself?
So my name is Melanie Sally DeSimo, and I am the CEO of a consulting firm called Precision Talent International, and primarily focus on leadership development. I do quite a bit also of work in the diversity, inclusion, equity, and belonging area as well. And so much of what leaders need to learn to be effective is around emotional intelligence. In fact, I wrote an info line, which was published by the Association for Talent Development, about emotional intelligence in the workforce. It's such a critical skill, and especially now, I think the workplace, the workforce, it's becoming so much more competitive to be able to bring talent into the organization. People have expectations for how they are to be treated in the workplace. Things have changed. I think COVID changed a lot. Not only are people looking for flexibility, but they're also looking for a workforce, a workplace that supports their lifestyle, that supports them as a human being. And emotional intelligence is a huge part of that. Leaders must operate in a way that's emotionally intelligent. Now, as a former, I guess I would say even reformed people pleaser, I this topic is it's a hot topic for me, and it's something that doesn't get addressed enough. There's such a fine line between meeting organizational needs or aligning with the requirements of your supervisor, your team, your department, your organization, and being a people pleaser. And so I think it's really important for for people to be able to distinguish between what's appropriate and effective and what is actually detrimental to the well-being to their well-being and also the performance of the organization. So I think this is a really important topic that's under addressed.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm so thrilled again to have both of you. Melanie, you're going to be bringing the, former HR leader business perspective to the conversation, as well as myself. You and I are both worked in organizations most of our career. Scott has his own organization, but he's bringing a kind of a therapy side to this conversation. So let me just start by asking this question to both of you. Where does this, why do people struggle with this, with these people pleasing habits? I'll call it a habit because it's not really a syndrome or a disease or anything like that. Where does this come from? Why do people struggle with this so much? And Scott, I guess I'll start with you. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts?
Well, I face the whole conversation. We should name that the desire to please others by itself is not problematic. Perhaps it's
Right.
even normal and healthy on some level. Like, I would much rather live in a world where people have some desire to please each other and be in community with each other than a
Yeah.
world where nobody has any desire to please each other. I think the problem becomes when when it's no longer adaptive, when we're sacrificing ourselves, even harming ourselves, becoming martyrs in the community, the organization, in our lives to please other people. And that's where it really can evolve into codependency and enmeshment and really abusive relationships. So I think on some level, everyone or almost everyone, maybe if you have a true antisocial personality disorder, you might not have this people-pleasing desire. On some level, we all have this desire. It's natural as humans. We're social animals. So we want healthy and stress-free relationships with each other. But when it becomes really maladaptive and over the top, it, in some cases, and maybe in most cases, is fueled by past experiences of adversity, of neglect, of abandonment, of trauma, and particularly childhood trauma and relational trauma. When we experience trauma in the context of our relationships and our sense of self-worth our sense of safety becomes wrapped up on kind of walking on eggshells around people around us and making
Yeah.
sure other people feel, making sure other people don't become angry so we don't get hurt.
Yes. Yeah. And even saying no could trigger, or excuse me, let me use the word activate others to do, get angry with us. And that's the last thing we want. I mean, I know in my own family, this played out a lot too. So, um, Melanie, what are your thoughts on this? Did you
So
have anything?
without the clinical background that Scott brings to the table, I have seen what Scott is talking about and how people show up at work, being a human resources professional, having been impacted by that, the trauma of their upbringing and their, how they were raised. And so I think in addition to that, sometimes their historical experiences in the workplace will contribute as well. If they've been in organizations or in job roles where they had very little say, very little locus of control, where they were penalized for disagreeing, there was not a great deal of psychological safety, people start to kind of repeat those habits, repeat that behavior. And I think that sometimes those types of experiences, you bring it into the next position, and because it feels like this is what it takes to get by. And I think that there
Mhm.
are sometimes even, from a DEIB lens, sometimes, women come into the workplace with this, having been socialized to be people pleasers and having been socialized to be not to be assertive and to put other people's needs ahead of themselves. And I think oftentimes too, people from disenfranchised groups are sometimes afraid of being the one that has their own opinion or being the one that has, that is not going to people please, just from the standpoint of sometimes feeling like even my job is at risk if I do not do every single thing that's asked of me without regard to my own well-being. And so I think sometimes it's those workplace experiences from previous positions and even maybe in the current position. Sometimes cultures can
Yeah.
be more oppressive than leaders realize it. And when we work in that type of a culture, it does challenge people to, not push back or not to have an opinion or not to speak up. And that's where oftentimes there's cultures that are conducive to people pleasing. And so I think that also contributes.
Yeah, it's an interesting thought, particularly around those communities that already feel like they're fighting the uphill battle of having to prove that they do belong, right? That they do belong there, and they don't want to rock the boat if they're already seen that way. So to not rock the boat more, just maybe say yes. And so then, what do we start seeing when people start saying yes to everything or wanting to please? Let's talk about from the individual perspective. If I'm a person that really has trouble saying no, um, for whatever reason, what kinds of things do we start seeing behavior wise, even physically, that kind of thing?
I think one of the challenges with it is that for every job position, there are expectations. There are specific deliverables that are required for every position. And if I am a people pleaser, then it's going to be really difficult for me to meet those needs. If there are expressed performance expectations and I am going beyond what those performance expectations are to meet everybody else's needs, then and putting my needs last, then I'm not going to meet those performance expectations. So one of, I think, the result of being a people pleaser is the inability to be effective in your job role. because
Yeah.
you're just taking on too much. And I think from the individual standpoint, I may feel like I'm helping this one, helping that one, helping the other one, but at the same time, my performance expectations are not being met, and I am accountable for those. So I think that's one of the downfalls of being a people pleaser.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, if you really are good at what you do, people tend to start seeing you as this is the go-to person. And then it just kind of plays on itself to where you're just trying to please everybody else. You like to do a good job, but then, yeah, your own place suffers.
Yeah.
Scott, did you have a thought too?
Yeah. Yeah. I think when we aren't able to say no and don't have boundaries, we start overcommitting to things, and we start doing things poorly because we've got too many things on our plate. We start forgetting things. We get overwhelmed emotionally. We become overly stressed. When we experience prolonged stress, the hippocampus, the part of the brain that stores memory, actually gets interrupted by the cortisol hormones, the stress hormones, and we're less likely to remember details, which is going to influence our productivity and our relationships. And on more extreme levels, in my clinical work, I've seen clients who really struggle to say no, or they've developed what we call learned helplessness, where you've tried to say no, you've tried to get help, and you've learned through repeated trauma or failure that it's not even possible. Like, it doesn't work. I'm stuck and helpless, so I'm not even going to try anymore. I'm just not gonna try to say no, because when I tried to say no to my abuser, it didn't work. And over time, I learned emotionally that trying to set boundaries doesn't work. People just steamroll the boundaries. But I think it can really activate past traumatic memories for folks. I actually peer reviewed a study 2 years ago in an academic journal where they found that employees reenact their family of origin roles in their workplaces, which kind of supports all these things that we're talking about.
Yeah, yeah. The other thing that occurs to me is if I am unable to say no or haven't learned how to establish boundaries properly and I'm just saying yes, it's really driving me to be inauthentic in who I am as a person because I'm not being honest with you about what my own needs are. And I think that there's a way that we need to learn to say no without it feeling like a strong no. Like we can say, or I know when I began in my own career to start saying, I really do want to help you with this. Here's the timeline that I could do this in, given the other things that are on my plate. It was often the request was then withdrawn or whatever if they knew that they couldn't get it as quickly as they needed. But I didn't feel like I was saying a strong no to somebody, like, no, I can't do it. I was expressing, well, yeah, I do want to help you. Here's the reality of what's going on. The other thing that happens too is like if our manager keeps loading things on us, we need to start learning how to help that manager help us prioritize because we just can't do everything. And again, if you're a really high performer, it's considered an honor to be asked to do more and more and more. And yet the reality is, we're human beings and can't do everything. So from the performance aspect, that in of itself is enough. I think it's really important that we as individuals start to really look and understand, why do I feel an urgent need to be saying yes to everything? Because I think that's where the growth really occurs. What's driving me to feel like I have to say yes to everything? Why can't I say no? Some of it, I think, is how do we learn how to say it without sounding like a uncooperative or not team player. but at the same time realizing that we may have a propensity to just say yes out of habits or for whatever, some of these other reasons that you were talking about, Scott, some of the learned helplessness. So
I think part of it too is learning how to tolerate the feeling of someone being disappointed in us when we say no, or even being upset with us when we say no, and having the ego strength, the psychological strength to be
yeah,
okay with someone being upset with us.
yeah. So we've talked a lot. Those are just to continue on this conversation. I think we've talked about some of the business issues that occur this around, not being able to perform. One of the other things that I think that oftentimes people don't think about, and I found this interesting when I started talking particularly to human resource leaders that were responsible for health insurance premiums and things like that. When I started talking about the impact of trauma and why the trauma informed workplace is so important to understand how trauma plays out. Prior to that, the word trauma, would like deer in headlights. But when I started equating it to when you have people that are behaving out of certain ways that they learned how to behave because of things that have happened in their life. And it starts impacting health insurance premiums because we can't say no. We get overstressed. We get work too hard. There's drugs and, then we did what coping mechanisms are coming up. Well, people start using alcohol, or you see vacation time, or you see medical issues coming up. And when it starts hitting the health insurance premium, that makes it a very real business case reason why we really should be talking about these things. And Melanie, I'll just ask you for any additional thoughts you may have there. Is there anything that kind of you can
No,
build on?
you're absolutely right. I mean, it can, in the long run, impact the your claims, your insurance claims. And on top of that, it also, when someone has said yes and yes and yes and yes, and now it also can impact your leave, where now someone is in need of a long-term of maybe FMLA, time to be off for a while, and that's because they're so overwhelmed that they can, and so stressed that they have to take that time off. Or if it's not a long-term leave, like an FMLA leave, you end up with multiple last-minute emergency leaves because someone just can't take it anymore. And that also impacts productivity of others in the department, because if one person ends up taking off a long-term leave or taking off last minute because they just couldn't take it anymore, then the others in their department end up having to pick up the slack that they leave behind. So absolutely, I agree that it impacts the claims for the health insurance, and it also can impact just even the well-being of the workplace because of people needing to take last-minute leave or long-term leave.
Yeah, interesting. Kind of interrupts the whole supply chain. And I know we're talking about the big picture, but I keep wanting to we have to keep going back to the person individually that's needing to learn how to stop this habit for themselves, because we're talking about what the big picture impact is, which I think is important, but how important it is to really start at the individual level to think about this stuff too.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Melanie.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna really coming at it from the top down as a business leader is essential, in that we need to be creating conditions in the workplace where people feel like they can say no. There's that empowerment, psychological safety, all the other variables that we talk about in trauma-informed care, trauma-informed organizations, and at the same time a bottom-up approach, in that each individual has some accountability to take for addressing their own unresolved issues. So I think the best way to go about it is it's both a bottom up and a top down approach.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's really important for individuals to develop a skill set to be able to give effective feedback so that they can give effective feedback when there's a situation that they're considering that would create a hardship for them. So effective feedback is important. And you talked earlier about how to say no. We've got to have in our toolkit the appropriate, respectful way to say, not at this time, to say, I've got this, this, and this on my plate. Which one do you want to remove, supervisor, in order for me to do this? Which one is the priority for me? To be able to say, unfortunately, I can't, I'd love to help with this. I don't have the capacity to do it at this time. And here are some resources that I can give you to help you along the way. So there's ways that we can say no. And I think it's important for organizations to, again, like Scott said, provide that psychological safety, perhaps help employees to be able to have a toolkit. And as individuals, we've got to be willing to leverage that toolkit when it's necessary. Here's, have a way in your back pocket to give feedback, have a way in your back pocket to be able to push back in a respectful and supportive way that is just using some assertiveness.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd be surprised as a psychotherapist how much of my sessions are spent with clients talking about their work stress and coaching them on almost like assertiveness training, how to set boundaries, how to say no.
Yeah.
And one client, we struggles with saying no, and we had to first learn how to not say yes in order to get to the point where he could learn how to say no.
Well, that's what I was thinking about. Like, even we can give all the training in the world, but a person who has such a habit, unconscious, that it's moved into the unconscious to automatically say yes for whatever reason, we really need to have. They really need to get it into their awareness in the first place that they're saying yes to something that maybe they shouldn't be saying yes to. Right? I mean, there's such a habit. Some people just have the habit of just saying yes to everything, and then they wonder why they feel lost about who they are and as a person and things. So even just bringing it into the awareness at the conscious awareness level, Scott, like you were saying.
Right. And like in therapy or in training even, I do a lot of exercises with using role playing to practice conversations like this. So let's practice, like next time your boss asks you to do another thing and you don't have time for it, how are you going to respectfully ask for help, ask for them to prioritize your responsibilities, say no, and the actual practice of finding the words and retrying it in a new way and refining it helps to build a sense of competence and then confidence that maybe I do have the skills to say no in my life.
Yeah. This is where I think coaching, let me think of how to say this. I think the therapy world has had to take on a lot of this conversation in their sessions. I mean, it's obviously all tied together. But as the world of coaching becomes seen as, or the benefit of coaching is seen more as a tool for helping people rather than fixing people or punishing, employees, where it's given as a benefit. I think this is where coaches can really, there's an opportunity to help with some of these same exact conversations, to role play and creating environments of safety. Not some organizations, people may learn things but don't even have an environment. Somebody may learn things in training or whatever, but the environment that they go back to really is not a safe place for them to practice it. And in a coaching conversation, we can be the person that's helping them role play through these conversations or whatever, and help them really discover, what might be the genesis for them needing to say yes all the time. There's certainly a very defined boundary here between coaching and therapy. So I don't want to be misinterpreted that I'm proposing doing therapy and coaching. I'm not at all. But we do in coaching bring a lot of, you can't divorce the person from who they are and their previous experiences. So some of these conversations will come up in coaching, but I don't mean to be, I just wanted to add my thoughts there. Melanie, I don't know. Did you have additional thoughts and some of the things we've been talking about in the past few minutes, Melanie?
No, I do agree that coaching is essential to help people gain the self-confidence to be able to say no. Oftentimes it's a challenge, people are challenged with not having the confidence, either, as we said earlier, because of past experiences or not actually knowing how. So the idea of role playing it, helping people with tools is really important. And I think coaching is a really powerful way to get there. So yeah, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah.
I would add too, these skills we've been talking about it in terms of the employee's relationship to the employer. But as we're talking, I'm thinking through my experience supervising other therapists and graduate students who are providing therapy to clients, and how, I don't know about other fields, but in the counseling social work field, most of us have a people-pleasing, we lean in that direction naturally.
Yeah.
And a lot of my work supervising staff is bumping up against this issue of, I hear you saying that you really want to comply with what your client wants, and because of standards or financial or ethical reasons, we can't do that. We need to learn how to say no to our clients, our customers at times too.
Yeah. Well, go ahead, Melanie.
That's a really, really important point. I mean, as leaders, we can contribute to this people-pleasing culture if we, if we don't address those tendencies in our staff members and other leaders. And also, we want to look at, are we rewarding the people pleasers? Does our culture cultivate this people-pleasing behavior? Is this what we're requiring of people? And sometimes I think it's an unconscious part of the culture where leaders, where that people-pleasing behavior is rewarded. Those are the people that get ahead. Those are the people that get the best assignments. Those are and then we continuously put more and more on them. And also, sometimes it's discouraging folks who are speaking up and folks who are pushing back. And so we have to, I think as leaders, we've got to be showing up in the workplace in a way that is not, that does not generate that behavior, that does not support those attitudes. Part of it is, part of it is kind of unconscious. I mean, I remember a situation where I was working, leading a team, and I was asking for input and feedback and pushback, and I wasn't getting it. And I would do this in my team meetings with my team members. And I noticed that I never had anyone push back. I never had any, and I was constantly giving work. And I remember I said, I noticed nobody's pushing back. Nobody's giving me any feedback. So I put that on the agenda for my one-on-ones. And the first person I spoke to, and I said, I'm not getting any pushback. I'm not getting feedback. I'm not getting ideas. And I would like that. Why do you suppose that is? And the person who I was spoken to, I'll call her Jenna. Her name's not Jenna, but I'll call her Jenna. She says to me, she said, you don't really want it. And I said, well, why would you say that? I'm asking for it. I'm coming to meetings requesting, and I'm sure that there are things that people want to push back on that people. And she said, no, you don't. She said, your face says, you might be saying with your mouth that you want that. your face says something different. And so as leaders, it's imperative that our behavior is either conducive to people pleasing or it's not. And so we've got to be really deliberate about soliciting, asking people, how do you feel about this new assignment? Are you able to do this? When would you fit it in? To be able to open the door for those conversations and to be deliberate about how we show up as leaders. And what I ended up doing in my one-on-ones is saying, look, I got this feedback, and I hear that I don't look like I want the feedback. I assure you I do. And if in fact you're pushing back, you're bringing an idea, you're, disagreeing, and it looks like I'm not comfortable with that, I said, call me on that too. Call me on that.
That is awesome. Well, and how important that is as a role model, because how many times as leaders, I've seen leaders, because they have their own ego needs, and they want to be seen as really leading a team that's kicking butt in the organization. They may say yes and yes and yes and yes. So they say yes without even thinking about the team. So there's that need for leaders to really look at their own motivations about what they're saying yes to. But even being open, that to me is a very emotionally intelligent story that you told, Melanie, because it really indicates to me that you were really allowing yourself to be vulnerable at that point and listen to things that may not have been so pleasant, but yet you were creating the culture by even just saying, hey, call me on it in the moment. The fact that that person had the courage to say you really don't want this in and of itself shows that somehow you had built a foundation enough to allow that person to take that risk. But how wonderful a story that is. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah. It was really a pivotal point for me as a leader.
Fascinating. So what we've talked a lot around a lot of different things. Is there anything, other thoughts that are coming to your minds as the two of you are listening? Like, what are things, we've talked about a few things that people can do. Are there other things that people can start doing to bring this, awareness to their own consciousness of their own desire to people please, and how they could maybe help start shifting it for themselves?
Something that I think is really important is to list your values, write them down, whether it's in a journal, whether it's just, in your, I guess people don't have daytimers anymore, but wherever you document your priorities, to list your values, what matters to you, what's important to you, and then take a step back and say, what percentage of my time am I spending here? So if I say what's most important to me is my relationship with my children, but my work is causing me to get home 7 p.m., 8 p.m., 9 p.m. every day. What percentage of my time am I actually spending on that I value most? So I think it's important to really reflect on that periodically. Am I investing my time and energy into those things that are most important to me? I think that's an important thing. And then it's also important to do the same thing about what are the organization's values? And am I investing my time and effort in driving those values? What are the organizational priorities as well? And to what extent is my work feeding the accomplishment of those priorities? And if I take a look at where I'm spending my time, where I'm spending my energy, and it's not aligning with organizational values, and it's not driving organizational results, then it's time for me to make some changes. And that means being really deliberate about where I'm going to spend my time and where I'm going to spend my effort, and making a decision each and every time when I'm asked to do something as to how it fits into my personal values, the organizational values, and the priorities for the position, for my department, and for my job. And I think if I take that time to be strategic and deliberate, it'll make all the difference in the world. And it also makes it easier for me to say no, because I can say, my priority right now is A, B, and C. And while this doesn't fit in, here are some resources that I can give to you that can help you without me being the one to do it.
Yeah, great. Scott,
Yeah.
anything to add there? Or?
I would agree with Melanie. I kind of psychologically do a similar thing. Part of my specialty is in sociometry and psychodrama, within which we have a modality, a tool that's called a role atom, where you draw yourself in the center of a page, and then you draw all of your, based on size and proximity, surrounding you on the page. And the roles that are bigger in the depiction take up more time and space, and the roles that are smaller take up less time and space in your life. And then you draw the nature of your connection between yourself and that role. If it's a straight line, it's a solid connection. If it's a squiggly line, it's a conflictual connection, and so on. So every year I draw a role atom for myself today, and a role atom for what I want my life to look like 1 year from now. And when I compare them, I have a real clear sense of the roles and sub-roles that I want to say no more often in, and delegate and make smaller, less time consuming, and the roles that I'm trying to create space for. So I go through it. Yeah, go ahead.
And when you try and actually start implementing that, how do you make sure that how do I want to ask this? Oftentimes I can do that, or many times we can put goals, and then when push comes to shove, we default to our our dysfunctional behavior, I'll call it. And when we're really trying to implement, that bigger atom or whatever that you said, the other role. So how have you helped yourself to be able to implement what you want to be able to do?
Yeah, I think having some support and accountability really goes a long way. Like, I'm thinking of someone who has people-pleasing tendencies. If they have some accountability and supportability, someone that wants them to say no, then they're going to maybe want to people-please that person that wants them to say no, and they can turn the people-pleasing strategy into something that helps them not people-please.
Yeah, that's so important, that support piece. And it's come up in almost every webinar that I've been doing in this series when we've talked about what are the tools, the community that we surround ourselves with, the support systems that we build into our lives that can keep us accountable, that create that place that's of safety where we can really hash through and talk through this stuff. So whether it's a therapist or a coaching situation, or just a small group that you're in, or whatever. Those of us in our own businesses, often put in place our own executive boards. That's part of, helping us do that. But yeah, I love that idea. I'm going to ask you to send some information about that, Scott, because in the description here, all the things that we've talked about today, I want to have links to different things, or what other kinds of tools. I love the value idea, Melanie. I think that's so important. I remember one time early in my career, I was working with a mentor who talked about when his clients would put strategic goals together during their strategic planning, and then they'd come up with these brilliant ideas, because we know that, right, CEOs and execs go off to these conferences and they read the latest and greatest, and then they come back and, oh, we want to do this and this and this and this. And he'd be like, look, let's go back to the strategy. How does this fit into what we're trying to accomplish? Does it or does it not? If it does, is it important now, or do we put it on the to-do list? Or if it completely falls out of it, we don't even go there. And I think that's what you were talking about with what I heard, Melanie, with you, that strong value piece keeps us grounded.
Yes.
and maybe gives us some confidence to say no to certain things and yes to certain things.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Are there any other things that leaders can do as we begin to wrap up this conversation in the organizations to help their leaders break free from people pleasing habits? I mean, we've talked about the need for leaders to be very aware of what cultures they're creating on their own teams, what's driving them. We've talked about some training. Any other thoughts that come to mind about what leaders can do to help?
So there's quite a bit of information. There's a few YouTube videos. Amy Edmondson, who's a Harvard professor, has done a lot of research and a lot of work around um, creating a psychological safety in the workplace and how important it is, what it looks like, and how you can create it as a leader. So I would recommend leaders to become familiar with what that looks like, what that feels like, because it's very um, it's very easy to be leading in a way that is not conducive to psychological safety and not realize it. It becomes very unconscious. And
Hmm.
so that, I think, is something that leaders can do to become more deliberate about creating that psychological safety in the workplace. That is so important. And so yeah, that's what I would recommend for leaders. And also for leaders to constantly, I mean, what worked for me, I think can be effective for any leader, is to open the door, being deliberate about opening the door to conversations, both in your team meetings and in your one-on-ones, so that if you continue to ask and continue to ask and continue to ask, eventually people hopefully will become comfortable and recognize that you really do want to support their well-being, and you really do want to make sure that they're focused on the highest priorities. And I think another thing that as a leader I can do is sit down with my staff in my probably in one-on-ones, and when anytime there's a request that comes in for them to be involved in, let's weigh that against what's already on your plate from the standpoint of how much time it will take, how much energy, how much focus, and how does it fit into the priorities. I think for the not just for leaders but also for employees, the best way to respond when someone says, "Can you do this?" The response for me is, "Let me think about it. Let me give that some thought. Give me some time with it." And that gives you a chance to sit with your supervisor. And for leaders, this is also advice for leaders: sit with your folks and say,
Hmm.
let's measure that against what else is on your plate before you go back to that person and give them an answer. So I think as a
Love,
leader, those are some of the actions that we can take in order to support people.
love it. Love it. And that time also allows you as an individual to take time and reflect, particularly if you have this propensity to say yes, learn how
Absolutely.
to say, let me think about it. You're not saying no,
Yeah,
you're not saying yes. Yeah.
yeah, that's
Scott, any
the
thoughts?
not
Yeah.
saying yes. That's part of it. Learning how to say not right now. Let me get back to you.
Yes.
Um,
Yes. Right.
Now I'm happy that you mentioned the work on psychological safety, Melanie. It was actually in a big Google-funded research study. The
Yes.
most important factor that contributed to productivity and
Yeah.
positive outcomes on teams was psychological safety.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it's the first of the 6 trauma-informed principles
Oh,
That's right.
okay.
Yeah.
for
We
trauma-informed
probably need to have a
organization.
whole webinar on trauma informed principles, Scott. Maybe we might do that together. But yeah, and it's so prevalent in it's a term that's thrown around a lot lately, just like emotional intelligence and psychological safety. And there's probably a lot of, just like the word love, misconceptions about what it means.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah. That's why I wrote my most recent book on trauma-informed principles, because people were throwing the word around, putting it on their websites and their marketing brochures without putting the work behind actually implementing the 6 principles and the 4 agency domains. So
Yeah,
that's a resource I would encourage organizational leaders to look. It's all created by SAMHSA, so you can
yeah,
download their books for free. Uh, Similarly, the Surgeon General's office a year and a half ago published guidance, best practices for healthy workplaces and supporting mental health in the workplace. And when I compare the reference list, the cited research from the Surgeon General's publication and SAMHSA's, they're citing almost all the same
they're
research.
very aligned. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
And
but there was
another resource. Oh, sorry to interrupt you.
yeah, I was just going to add there was another recent study where they found that supervisors in the workplace have more impact on one's mental health than their own therapist or partner does.
Wow.
Oh, wow, I'd like to get that citation, Scott. I would believe that. I mean, we spend 50, 60 hours, whether we're at the place or not, in our work lives, unfortunately. But I believe that. And if we're trying to create mental healthy workplaces, knowing how much power or impact you have as a leader. I mean, those of us who've been doing leadership support and leadership development and coaching and consult, we've known this for years. I think for some leaders, it's just becoming more understood. There's another resource that I want to recommend that just came back again on my purview this weekend was this book called What Happened to You by Dr. Bruce Perry. And again, I'll put this in the um, the description below as a reference. But it is a very in-depth look at our behaviors, why we behave in the workplace and in our lives the way that we do. I'll never be able to quote it as well as he does. He's been studying child development for years and years and years, but he and Oprah wrote this book together, What Happened to You. And as leaders, when we start seeing behavior, instead of saying what's wrong with you, starting to ask what happened to you, really opens up a whole purview of understanding people's behaviors and how leaders can help them. Again, it's not a leader's role to be their therapist, but it does create a level of empathy and understanding. And as leaders, we can start creating cultures differently when we start looking at what happened to you and all the behaviors that come about as a result of which people pleasing is one of them. Things that have happened to us in our lives, as we talked about, have driving some of these behaviors. So, well, I want to thank you so much to the two of you. I've loved this conversation. I think we could go on for hours about it. It's just a wealth. It's just such an important aspect of our work lives today. And who we are as individuals and how are we succeeding in our own lives, nevertheless our work lives. But thank you so much for the two of you for joining me today and being willing to take time out of your busy schedules to have this conversation. Were there any closing thoughts that either one of you had before we sign off?
I'm really glad that you're addressing this because I do think that it's an issue that has been really under addressed. And there's such a fine line between meeting the requirements of a supervisor and being a people pleaser. So it's such an important concept to explore and think about and provide resources for. So thank you for the insight to bring this to the forefront.
You're welcome. Thanks for your participation, Scott.
Yeah, I think the other resource that comes to mind is Gabor Mate's work, where
Oh, yes.
he talks a lot about people pleasing and ties it back to childhood trauma. I think he has a whole book, When the Body Says No, and he talks about when we don't develop the capacity to say no verbally and set boundaries, that our body will start to say no for us through disease and stress. And I think he makes a direct connection between cancer and overworking and people-pleasing tendencies. So there's good reasons to be looking at this and working on it. I think
Yeah.
it ties nicely into the emotional intelligence theme for this series, and is especially important for workplaces because we're working with humans.
Yes.
And emotions are a big part of being human.
Yes. Well, they're kind of the whole reason we are human, I think. So, anyway, Scott and Melanie, thank you again so much. And thanks for all of you for joining us. And we will see you at a future conversation. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. You as well.
Thank you.